What if one company controlled all of the concert tickets to your favorite artist and could charge whatever they wanted? What if politicians could choose their voters instead of voters choosing them? And what if the President of America could take the country into war without Congress ever approving it? These aren't hypothetical questions. They are real legal battles happening right now in courts and government across the country. That's what we are breaking down today on Wahl on Law. Hello and welcome to the 12th episode of Wahl on Law. My name is Jonas Wahl, and I am a pre-law student at the University of Delaware. On this podcast, we cover what's happening across the country in law and policy and how it affects your daily life. Today, we do not have a guest joining us, but on the bright side, we do have about 2 weeks of legal news to catch up on. So without further ado, let's get right into it. There's 3 major legal developments that have happened in the past 2 weeks. First, we are going to discuss the United States District Court ruling on Live Nation and Ticketmaster, which has now been deemed an illegal monopoly. Then, we will discuss the redistricting measure that was just passed in Virginia, allowing Democrats to potentially flip 4 congressional seats, but is now under fire. Finally, we'll discuss the failed House of Representatives vote on a war powers resolution, allowing President Trump to continue military operations in Iran without congressional approval. First, let's start with the Live Nation and Ticketmaster trial. On April 15th, a New York jury found that Ticketmaster and its parent company, Live Nation, illegally monopolized U.S. live markets. Let's break this down. So first, what is the definition of a monopoly? According to the Legal Information Institute, a monopoly is defined as when a single company or entity creates an unreasonable restraint of competition in a market. To make this more understandable, think about it this way. You want to buy a water bottle. You look online and find a company called Water Bottle Inc. They are the only water bottle company in the world. You go to Water Bottle Inc. and they say that a plastic water bottle is $100. You think that's outrageous. As you know that a plastic water bottle only costs about $5 to make, but you realize that there's no other store to go to. So you're forced to buy a water bottle from Water Bottle Inc. Essentially, if there's no competition for a product, or if one company has enough power to control prices, it could be a monopoly. Now, there's been claims that companies like Apple are monopoly, but if you wanted a different phone, you could always go to Samsung or a different provider, which shows that there still is competition in this market. Returning back to the case at hand, Ticketmaster and Live Nation became one company in 2010 through a merger, combining the largest ticket seller with one of the biggest concert promoters. While the merger raised antitrust concerns at the time, it was still approved. So, to actually understand where the Live Nation and Ticketmaster lawsuit first came from, we have to flash forward 12 years after 2010. In November of 2022, there was an event that has become known as the Taylor Swift Ticketmaster fiasco. During this time, tickets were being sold to the United States leg of Taylor Swift's Eras tour, and as I'm sure we all know, the tour was very popular. When the sale went online on November 15th, the website crashed within an hour. Ticketmaster said that the crash was because of unprecedented demand, and they later went on to cancel the general sale. Still, 2.4 million tickets were sold, but the issue was that many of these tickets were being sold to scalpers. Scalpers buy tickets for market price, then resell them at much higher prices. Many people were understandably outraged at the scalpers and Ticketmaster, but they didn't really have any other options, so if they wanted a ticket to the Eras Tour, they'd have to pay a lot of money. So in response to the criticism that Ticketmaster received, Congress started discussing whether the company should be investigated and potentially broken up, separating Ticketmaster and Live Nation into two separate entities. The idea here was that splitting them up could create more competition, potentially decreasing ticket prices. The lawsuit officially began in 2024 when the federal government of the United States, along with 40 U.S. states, filed a lawsuit against Live Nation and Ticketmaster, arguing that they monopolized the industry by controlling ticketing, concert booking, venues, and promotions. The lawsuit additionally alleged that the company was engaged in anti-competitive conduct, meaning that fans had to pay higher fees, artists had fewer options for touring, and venues were being forced into using Ticketmaster. Basically, if you wanted to buy a ticket for a concert, you usually had to go through this company, meaning they could set the prices at a very high level with very little pressure. Now, the Department of Justice settled the lawsuit with Live Nation and Ticketmaster in March, and some states followed that settlement, meaning they dropped their claims. But more than 30 other states chose to pursue their own claims. Thus, the trial went forward. The main part of the state's argument was that they claimed Ticketmaster had an 86% share of the ticketing market, while Live Nation said that that claim was misleading and argued their market share was closer to 44%. There was a lot of other back and forth, but ultimately, the jury found that Ticketmaster overcharged concertgoers by $1.72 per ticket. There are also other damages being considered, but we'll have a ruling on those later this year. As a result of this verdict, Live Nation stock has dropped over 5%. And, as always, there's talks of an appeal being filed. So, what happens next? Well, for any listeners who are trying to buy a ticket for a concert, this verdict could lead to lower ticket prices. But unfortunately, there's no guarantee, and appeals are still ongoing. So the actual impact of this case might not be felt for at least a few months. But for now, if anybody's keeping score, United States 1, monopolies 0. Now, let's talk about a recent redistricting measure that was just passed in Virginia, but was overturned. On Tuesday, April 21st, Virginia voters approved a new congressional map drawn by Democrats that aims to flip as many as 4 Republican seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. Let's break it down. I think redistricting will be best understood with a quick example. Imagine there's 12 people, 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans. You have to split them into 4 groups of 3 people, and each group elects 1 representative. You might think that leads to an even result, but it doesn't have to. Let's say 3 of the groups each have 2 Democrats and 1 Republican. In both of those groups, the Democrat would win. Then, the last group has 3 Republicans, so a Republican would win there. Now, Democrats win 3 out of 4 seats, even though the population was evenly split. And that's how redistricting can change outcomes without changing the number of voters. Now, this new Virginian map wasn't just chosen by the government. Instead, they sent out a ballot asking all Virginians to either vote to approve or reject the new map. About 51% of Virginians approved the map, with 49% denying it. So while it did pass with the voters, it was a very divisive issue. But the new map did not last long. 1 day later, a Virginia judge ruled that all votes for or against the proposed redistricting amendment were unconstitutional, citing rules about certain requirements that the referendum did not meet. So, this new measure is not currently in effect, but the Attorney General of Virginia said that he plans to appeal this ruling, meaning the fight in Virginia is long from over. So why does this matter? Right now, the US Congress is extremely divided. Both chambers are currently controlled by the Republican Party, but they only have a very narrow lead. That makes the 2026 midterm elections very important because control of either chamber can determine what legislation moves forward. So, there is quite a lot at stake. And as always, if there's any updates on the Virginia map, we will be right back here explaining what happened. Finally, let's cover the failed House of Representatives vote on a war powers resolution. On April 16th, 2026, the United States House of Representatives voted 213 to 214 to not invoke the war powers resolution to remove American forces from Iran. Let's break this down. First, we have to go back to March. On March 4th, the US Senate voted 53 to 47 to not invoke the war powers resolution. Then, the resolution was considered in the House, but now that the House voted it down, the resolution is basically dead. It doesn't move forward, it just fails. But wait, why are we even trying to invoke the war powers resolution? For those who listened to Wahl on Law episode 5, what I'm about to say is going to sound very familiar. Right now, the United States and Israel are engaged in a rapidly escalating military conflict with Iran. The crisis began in late February when US and Israeli forces launched a large series of airstrikes targeting Iranian military structure and senior leadership. Since then, the conflict has expanded across the region. Iran has launched missile and drone attacks against Israeli targets and other countries. Meanwhile, the United States and Israel have continued to bomb Iranian missile sites, with Iran threatening more retaliation. And that's exactly where Congress comes in. Under the War Powers Resolution of 1973, Congress can force a vote to require the president to withdraw U.S. forces from military conflict that lawmakers have not authorized. The Democrats' argument was that Congress, not the president, has the power to declare war, with Republicans arguing the exact opposite and saying that the president already has enough authority as commander-in-chief to conduct military operations, especially during active conflicts or when responding to threats against the United States or its allies. However, a majority of the US Congress voted not to advance the resolution, blocking it and allowing the president's campaign to continue without new congressional approval. So, why does this matter to you? Mainly, if you remember our last episode of Wahl on Law, we discussed how US taxpayers are funding the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's no different in this situation. Every day that the war in Iran continues, we are paying for it. Higher gas prices, taxes, and much, much more. But with Iran trying to develop nuclear weapons, some argue that the US has to act as a peacekeeping force. Basically, the real question is how much are we going to pay for security? And that is a decision that falls on both our leaders and the public. So there we have it. Monopolies, redistricting, and war. 3 incredibly important but divisive topics. And now, more than ever, it matters that we pay attention to what's happening around us. Because at the end of the day, knowledge isn't just power. It's how you stay informed and in control. Before we close out, thank you for listening to the 12th episode of Wahl on Law. If you like this episode, make sure to follow or subscribe to Wahl on Law so you don't miss any future episodes. You can also sign up for our email list at wahlonlaw.com to get notified whenever a new episode drops. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time on Wahl on Law.